Like, what is the motivation of Gary Gensler? Let's just say that he actually does believe in 2018 that it is a security. Let's say he does believe that. And then he goes X number of, 3 years to Congress and then refuses to answer the question. So if he is hiding it, then who is he protecting? How much money? What subpoenas and lawsuits is he keeping maybe his friends away from? That's sort of one path. A second path would be,
grab a drink. It's time for another episode of Off the Record, on the Rocks. Join Michael Toner and Ankarina Lara as we discuss the latest in all things Web3, AI, metaverse, and crypto. Tune out the noise and turn up the signal as we pour ourselves into the future. Better make mine a double.
I really have been sitting here just celebrating small wins. I'd love to hear that you were driving in traffic, just buy, watching the bounces on this rocky roller coaster of Bitcoin. We're coming to you April 30th on record date, and there's blood in them streets. I called it 4 days ago. I was watching these cycles every month. You're getting this just boom, 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 this bottoming out right below 60K Bitcoin price, 59,650, 59,850. You're seeing these floor prices set in, really creating some support levels that you see the price action happening. And so set a limit buy, watched it play out today, watching the bounce come back. The fact that I came within less than $200 of calling the bounce number, feeling really good. And I'm like, look at this crazy curve. I'm sending you the text of like, it's just crazy to see the sell-off. What is happening in the market? CZ today getting sentenced to 4 months in jail, 4-month sentence. And give me your take on blood in the streets and what does this mean? Where's this taking us?
Well, we talk about blood in the streets as a buy signal, or at least something that we consider a buy signal, not financial advice. But when clearly people with lots of crypto are selling and taking some amount of profit off the table, or at least moving it sideways, we don't know if they're taking it out or if they're just putting it into other projects, but the price is coming down. You set the limit. I mean, I don't know if I would have picked 59.8. That's a pretty low one, but you hit it. Like, it's that these swings down is what the accumulation of these big companies, what they need. If they're in the business of getting as much as they can, they would like to get as much Bitcoin as they can at the cheapest price they can. And to the effect where they can swing it down by $10,000 from 70 to 60K, big deal. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking at that. I'm getting notices telling me this is bottoming out. All that to me says, okay, there's news. What's the news? A couple of things, actually. One, CZ,
big
right?
Stuff
he's gonna get jail time, but he's getting it in Dubai, where he lives. And the name of the movie I couldn't remember, which was Goodfellas. It reminds me of Goodfellas, where all the mob guys go to jail, in quotes, where they're just living in like a weird little apartment. And they're getting delivered lobsters, and they're getting delivered, whatever. And there's one guy cutting the garlic just so and making beautiful dinners. And they just hang out, pay their time, and off they go. So it sounds like CZ got away with a slap on the wrist. I'd love to hear the other news, though. I think another big story is, it sounds like Gary Gensler.
Yeah, this is the one.
And the SEC were maybe not as forthcoming with Congress as he said he was. And you and I ripped apart this testimony. This is a year ago, almost to the day. This is talking about, remember, Gary's like, I've never bought Bitcoin. They're like, sir, Senator Patrick McHenry with the little bow tie. Sir, you teach a class called Bitcoin and you never bought any. That's right. Isn't that a problem? And it just, is ETH a security? We're not prepared to make a designation, and all of the dodging. So to me, the combination of CZ going to jail, and then tell me about like what McHenry sort of uncovering. It sounds like there was a little scuttlebutt from like leaked memos or something, that they're hiding something. What's the total story?
It really just has to do with the timing of this consensus filing. And I guess whatever the information that was contained in the in the filing, the timing, when you start to piece the timeline back together. Now we're in 2024. We're heading into May of 2024. And only now, as they can unseal these documents and you go back and you look at the timing, something doesn't add up, because the SEC, so I'll read here. This is from cryptoslate.com. This is new information from the consensus legal action against the SEC showed that the regulator began its probe into Ethereum's security status last year. And the headline reads, the SEC suspected Ethereum was a security since 2018, new consensus documents reveal. So something doesn't add up, which is that they were clearly investigating or suspecting that Ethereum was a security since 2018. There was no definition put out. There was no regulation put out. There was no clarity on the overall regulatory status of Ethereum. It has been a persistent issue from the market. The SEC has failed to comment on it. And in that 2018 lecture at MIT, Gensler himself stated that ETH is not considered a security. So what is shifting here? What has changed? And does it have anything to do with we're seeing a sell-off of Ethereum hitting a new low? I don't know. I haven't looked in the last hour or so if it's bouncing back, but just this turmoil to me is the main. And then one other piece here. This is from 37 minutes ago. McHenry slams Gensler for misleading Congress about Ethereum's classification, because if this information did not come out in those hearings, that we are evaluating this, that we are concerned that it may be a security, then how is the market to have ever gotten any clarification if Gensler himself is flip-flopping back and forth on what this thing is?
Yeah, and what really, let's kind of peel back from that too, because what I'm most interested in is trying to understand why it is, like, what is the motivation of Gary Gensler? What's the motivation? Let's just say, like, there's, like, I guess a couple different thought, experiments, right? Let's just say that
I'm here for it. Let's do it.
He actually does believe in 2018 that it is a security. Let's say he does believe that, okay? And then he goes X number of, 3 years to Congress and then refuses to answer the question. So if he is hiding it, then who is he protecting? How much money? What subpoenas and lawsuits is he keeping maybe his friends away from? That's sort of one path. A second path would be he doesn't actually know the answer, right? He doesn't actually think it's a security. It might be. He's still trying to figure that out in the context of crypto in general, et cetera. And then he continues to Congress. And of course, it looks bad because he's like, well, I still don't really know. And we're still trying to figure it out. And, you can't answer the question correctly. And now as we come to today, let's just say again, in that second example, he is as honest as he could possibly be. And now he gets to this point where now he has to answer for maybe the memos and internal stuff from the SEC generally, which was, as McHenry shows, which was suggesting it was going this way, but yet he wasn't the final say. So there's also even a third one, which I wonder about. Where is Gary Gensler trying to go next? Because you don't just stay the head of the SEC forever. And typically a new administration comes in. Let's just say there's a new administration. He might change out. Even an old administration gets renewed, he might want to change out, right? I think it's a 6-year. I think it's technically a 6-year stint
term,
but you can
term bridge multiple.
And so, like, if you are maybe trying to steer, it would be interesting if he was trying to steer ETH to a particular place to set himself up and other people like him for a future position that would be advantageous. And the delay,
we can help you
and the
navigate
confusion.
this. We can help you, companies. I'm now a free agent. Gary Gensler here. I know these markets. Let me come help you, Coinbase. Let me come help you, Jeff Bezos. Let me come help you, name your favorite company, MicroStrategy, dabbling in cryptocurrencies. I can help you navigate these uncharted waters. It's a good theory. it has to be something. And I do think that the lens of history, at some point, we will have a clarity around why there was this period of uncertainty. The other one that I've been trying to think through is that we know he was teaching this Bitcoin class at MIT, and we know that in that he was describing and understood it as not a security, as a commodity, as it was finite, as it was not meeting the Howey test, as it was, not a security at the end of the day. And I wonder if from a regulatory perspective, it would have been easier for the SEC to regulate if Bitcoin was the only one that could sort of be blessed and the others had to be roped in under these surveillance partners. But those would then be clearly securities, because that is what those broker dealers do. That's what Coinbase does. That's what Robinhood does. That's what Fidelity does. They broker securities. Fidelity can do this all day long. Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, they can all do it. But will define that everything else is a security so that he could regulate and get to the BlackRock buying of Bitcoin ETFs, and why the SEC weighing in on those approvals and those timelines. And we're still not through. That's the other thing we got to get to, is the Ethereum ETF got approved in Hong Kong.
Yes.
Today?
I was just going to go there. It was last week.
On tax day, right? We talked about this
on tax day. So
weeks.
I mean, that's where I think we got to just we got to pause for a second, because here's where it gets very confusing, I would say, in that there's nothing that would preclude, say, BlackRock or Fidelity or US Bank or one of the new 9, ARK Investments, et cetera. Would anything preclude them from buying the spot Ether ETF on the Hong Kong exchange? Like, is there anything? So can a person in Hong Kong buy a security from the United States?
Yes.
And so a person from the United States could buy a security from Hong Kong.
Correct.
So if there is going to be so Gary Gensler and the American apparatus, which is the regulatory financial bodies that we talked about, if they have zero input and zero influence over international markets, then maybe there is this interesting dynamic, which is the United States is just never going to touch it, because it implicitly violates all of those rules, the Howey test and the this test, all of our antiquated, weird laws that we keep citing. What was the other one? The Wells notice, right? When you get the Wells notice, which is like, oh, we're about to sue you, and then you get that thing, and it's like this whole weird, archaic process that is named after a whole bunch of old dead white guys. Some guy named Mr. Wells, some guy named Mr. Howey, some guy named Mr. Gensler. He's not dead, sorry. But then all of that is a U.S. thing only. So meanwhile, at Hong Kong, and I would bet dollars to donuts that we see a spot ETF in Singapore. Who knows? Maybe one in the UK, maybe one on the Nisei in Japan. I mean, it could be anywhere except for the U.S. And that wouldn't stop the roll, right? Because you're looking at your app today on Coinbase, however you bought your Bitcoin. I was looking at Gemini, looking a little bit at Kraken. Anybody can go use those. How about CZ and Binance? I mean, that's broadly international. So, gosh, if Hong Kong has a spot ETH ETF, what would prevent Binance from offering that, just not quote to American investors? Let's not talk about how we could VPN in, Senator Warren. But it seems like as long as it's available on the internet, it's available. And so maybe this whole weird, the problem is that the United States, just to maybe put a point, I'll see what you think about this, is this has got to be the slipperiest slope that they have stood on from an SEC regulation standpoint in a long time, because Bitcoin sits over here and is very unique, right? It's a technology. And then Ethereum and every other crap coin sits on this other side of a fence where they all share something that is specific. They all have a human being, and in many cases, a whole battery of human beings, developers, working on a blockchain that is being funded by other corrupt human beings. So it feels like if the ETH ETF were to happen, then what would prevent the Sol ETF and the Cardano ETF and the Shiba Inu and the Pepe and all the crazy stuff ETFs. And if that's something that we know is going to happen, then they can never say yes. But as long as Hong Kong or anyone else is okay with it, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the United States doesn't want to touch that tax money because it's just such a volatile, caustic material at this point. And what do you think? Is it that hard to wrangle?
I don't think that's the direction that's going to go. I think that the ETF is going to get approved. The Ethereum ETF in the US will get approved on the schedule. We should go look for those dates.
June 11th.
What we get to as the final date in June. And I see no reason why the ETF, but I think you'll see some of that last minute maneuvering that we saw with the Bitcoin ETF of like the surveillance partner, the KYC rules, the backing with US cash. Maybe that's the difference. Maybe in the Bitcoin ETF, they stated there's like, it's got to be backed by greenbacks, but on the ETF, the Ethereum one, nah, we're not going to touch that one. To your point, it still would say, okay, you guys can go trade in this very volatile cryptocurrency market. We'll let you have your electronic, your ETP, your electronic traded products over here around Ethereum, right? But they're not going to be backed by the US dollar, not those ones, not the Ethereum ones, not every other shitcoin that comes after. Only the Bitcoin one will be backed by US greenbacks. How about that?
So then the Ethereum spot ETF, by that rationale, would be backed by Ethereum or backed by
nothing.
Hong Kong dollars? Just not American money.
I guess. I don't know. Or maybe with Bitcoin.
That actually would be interesting. And actually, that would be the one, if they were to say that, then I would actually believe it as a real product. Because the thing about Ethereum that is funny is that Ethereum is kind of like American dollars, right? I mean, Ethereum is a digital currency that the largest holders of Ethereum, and including Vitalik Buterin, who's the founder, one of the founders, can just create more whenever he wants to. So similarly, the United States government can print money. We saw it happen over a pandemic, right? So if you have the ability to turn on the money machine and quote back your ether, then is an ETH spot ETF just a wildly diluted sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of it just takes more ETH to back ETH, and therefore we keep creating more ETH, and therefore there's more in circulation, and then you get an inflation issue. So it almost feels like you'd have to say the thing that it is actually explicitly not allowed to back it. I like your idea where it's like, hey, if you want to have a spot Ether ETF, it has to be backed with Bitcoin and cash and not ETH. Because if it's backed with ETH, we all know you funny business. You're going to go out and just print more ETH and then just fake it and artificially jack the price. And you want to. Like, there's no way they could allow them to have that perfect little circle where they're just, kiting checks in a circle basically to keep the price high. It feels like it's like maybe, but like you said, if it's surveillance partners, that is really the question. It's like that old the old doll painting, right? The watchers, or it says who is watching the watcher, right? There's a line of people who are watching each other, and eventually the line goes into infinity. So if there is an ETH ETF and there are surveillance partners who are watching them, who's watching the surveillance partners? Is it AI? Is that our trust layer?
I
watching
think that's
all this?
exactly
Maybe that's
it.
what Gary was talking about.
Gary Gensler is going to emerge as he's going to be the biggest AI influencer when he exits the SEC later this year. And he's not going to come help you solve your financial regulatory problems. He's going to help you use artificial intelligence to know that what you're selling is who you're selling it to, right? To meet the regulatory requirements, you're going to need to use this bot. It's
the Gary bot. So what that sort of suggests to me is that, look, just for our listeners' benefit, the Ethereum difference we're talking about, the distinction between Bitcoin and Ethereum, is that in the case of Bitcoin, you can't influence the nodes, meaning the way that the blocks are approved, validated, and put into the chain. You can't influence that by just having wealth of Bitcoin. It's all equitable across the network. In the case of Ethereum, however, that's the opposite. You need lots of ETH to be a node, aka if you are really big, rich, and a whale, as they say, then you can really control the ebbs and flows of the network. So that's where the surveillance aspect comes in. So if you're saying similar to the new 9 Bitcoin ETFs, right? There's 9 of them. Maybe there'll be a dozen by the end of it. Will there be a dozen-ish ETH, retailers, if you will? And then is that going to require is Coinbase going to be tapped to be all of their surveillance partners? Someone's going to have to be, and it's going to have to be a unique company, right? Otherwise, there will be room for even more corruption, right? You can't have 12 surveillance partners, each watching one of 12 spot ETH ETF sellers, because then each of them could kind of collude. You need one ring to rule them all.
One AI bot to oversee all of the surveillance partners, right? That now the surveillance partners, when we talk about the surveillance partners, I mean, let's put this in, even that phrase, we unpacked this a few times, but these are the humans inside of Coinbase who have likely been through full background checks, full KYC from the federal government to know who these people are, right? They are the ones who are in the meetings, reviewing the accounts, looking at the statements, tracking the algorithms, knowing how when a trade comes across and someone sets a limit buy and the money has to be set aside into a what's the word I'm looking for? You hold in an escrow account.
Escrow account. I thought you meant a Bahamian sex shanty.
No, not that one. But I'm going to set this in an escrow account. Then we're going to execute the like there's rules of how this thing has to happen. And there are people and there are humans inside of those companies. But yeah, if you had an AI bot who could verify that these humans are doing what they say they are doing, are they being truthful with the SEC? Are they sharing exactly what they're seeing on their screen, exactly how the algorithm is working, how the money is being backed, how the books are being balanced? First cash in, first cash out. Like how are they handling this stuff? I could see that is really where that innovative wave that I truly believe is happening right now in the United States. There are meetings happening. I saw one next week with FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, doing an AI regulatory debrief in New York next week. So you're seeing more of these kind of auxiliary bodies, not just the big guy, not just SEC, but all of the periphery starting to show up, and they're all talking about AI. I saw a note, an ad from Visa yesterday or the day before, and it was like AI is now enabling new payment mechanisms, new processes for payments. And it's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. AI itself is not doing that. But AI is the only tool I think that can make sense of an infinite ledger. Oh, I got another one we got to talk about.
Which
Shifting topics for a moment, which is New York Stock Exchange evaluating and polling its NYSE members about a switch to a 24/7 trading schedule. And I saw this headline come across. I got to look at it. I did not send you this one. I've gotten really bad.
Well, but doesn't that already exist? Or are you saying a human version?
There you go. Exactly. This is from NASDAQ. Interesting. Today, the stock exchange is funny. When I Google this, it just says, I Googled NYSE 24/7 and it says 9:30 a.m. - 4 p.m. the stock exchange is only open during trading hours. Everything else is off trading hours. But what does Bitcoin have, and what does a cryptocurrency market have that the New York Stock Exchange doesn't? Is that it's traded 24/7, 365. I could see that this is another angle of the US government getting the technology in place to facilitate a 24/7 real-time trading of financial instruments. That's one we got to unpack. And then, did you see the new Coinbase commercial about pizza and how money?
I mean, they steered right into that really expensive with the $360 million Papa John's or whatever. They're kind of keying off that, which is now the famous meme. I mean, the fact that like kids today who are in middle school and lower school, they've heard of the Papa John's pizza story. Like that's cracked into Gen Alpha, which is even before Gen Z's worldview, which is a crazy one. But to me, look, I thought for sure, and we had talked about this, I want to say maybe once on the show, because we started this during pandemic. I thought the pandemic was going to be the forcing function that finally just said, okay, we're running black box algorithms. We call it after hours trading. It isn't a person going into an interface and clicking. It's this other thing that exists that you kind of set up in advance and it kind of runs around. But it's sort of like, it's like human trading light, right? I wrote the application, so it does it for me when it's off hours, but I personally can't. So I thought when COVID came, for sure, that the New York Stock Exchange was just going to say, no more traders on the floor. Like, no more 6 feet apart, social distancing. Like, there's no way you can have all those guys all crowding in on each other, like waving their little tickets, screaming, 110 and Forks Valley, and screaming. Like, that just seems so antiquated. Just like the Wells and the Howie and all these old tests. Like, really, these guys are out there and saying, I'll tell you what, see, I want to take 4 of these. I'll give you 2 of those. What do you say? Write it right here on this. Scratch on this piece of paper with a pencil.
That
and
is how it works.
Random runner who like runs and like pokes little chits out of like hanging chads, and they feed it through a little machine and it goes, and it's like, that's right. It's like a stenography machine. So it's so antiquated.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, for sure, just get them all home and safe. But no, they all come right back to the floor and everyone's still doing this again and waving their little tickets around. So maybe now this is that move to finally say, hey, if we're the United States going to go 100% modern current and be the thought leader here, we're not going to pretend that a bunch of guys like rabble rousing down on the stock exchange floor represents the global economy. It needs to be an always on and on demand, bring your AI to US type of a vibe. And if you say, hey, on your phone, here's the United States Wall Street app or whatever it's going to be called. Here's the SEC approved, app, IRS condoned, FDIC insured, all those great acronyms app. And you can use it to buy slices of stocks or fractionalized pieces of stocks whenever you want. So when you're traveling to Montenegro to go visit your boy Do Kwon, or you're traveling to Dubai to go see CZ in jail, maybe you're just going to go to Hong Kong to check out the spot ETF market. You can be like, oh no, I'm actually going to buy some Apple right now. I'm going to buy some Microsoft. And I can do that, even though it's 4 a.m. in the States. Like that, shouldn't have COVID have forced that? Why did we, were we just too worried about everyone's future job that we couldn't just let everybody walk off that floor? What's holding us back?
I think I would really need to dig into the mechanics, but even as you're describing that, think about there are people in Hong Kong who, when they wake up and it's their trading hours and they're going to buy a US based stock today, when they're doing that trade, it's being put into like a side trade, right? It's being put into a little escrow account to then bulk the trades, to say, okay, I'm just going to get all the orders, all the limit orders out of Hong Kong for everyone who bought Apple. And the moment the stock opens, the opening price is what everybody buys it at, right? And like the roll-up concept of how international markets have to work. Think about that from a blockchain perspective and the way roll-ups work in like aggregating blocks of transactions. In order to then have it be a much easier data exchange. And the moment that goes away, the only solution I come back around to is you will need that black box coming from the other direction to make sense of all the receipts. Who traded what to whom, at what price, show me the ledger, show me each individual transaction. And the moment you do that on a 24/7 basis, why wouldn't you be putting those trades in the blockchain? Tokenization of digital assets and the tokenization of our stock market, I think, will take the next decade or longer. But I think it's starting now.
That's the concept, the tokenization. That's the right word of the stock market. Because what you're describing is, for after hours trading, there's effectively this it's like a pause. The algorithms are making trades, things are happening, stuff is being bulked in. So it is possible, like it closes, right? Let's just say the Microsoft stock closes the night at 4 p.m. Eastern, which is very arbitrary. Got to make time to go get some martinis before you catch the
we got to have
subway
two
out to
martinis
Jersey.
after the worst. Bye now. Oh, I'm tired. Let me go get a drink.
These blue cheese stuffed olives aren't going to eat themselves, you dummies. So you stop there. Let's just say it's at a couple $100 or whatever. And then for whatever reason, after hours trading kicks in, right? With all these algorithms and these buys. And for whatever reason, there's a whole bunch of activity on that stock, on Microsoft. And so then when it opens again at 9:30 a.m. Eastern the following day, and you're still thinking about, your martini from the night before because you're having a Bloody Mary at breakfast with some idiot, and you come in and you're like, wait, what? The price has gone up significantly overnight because all those trades were waiting and then were resolved out of the escrow at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. So what we're really saying is the after hours trading actually needs to be tokenized and made real time so that at any given moment, everyone in the world who is interested in that stock, in this case, we keep using Microsoft, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second, because they are also investors in Consensus and MetaMask, who are the main guys in Ethereum, along with Vitalik Buterin, so they're connected. But let's just say that stock pops, you'd want to know where it is, even at 4 a.m. US time.
Yeah.
Is it trending up or is it trending down? As you said, the real-time nature of those graphs. So again, as soon as what we're saying is by the end of this decade, that's where the sea change is coming. Doesn't that remove the need for the human to do the buy and the sell? Or is there still an argument to be made that institutional buyers who appreciate and who probably demand a concierge level service would still like to have the guy in the crappy suit who's sweating way too much for the time of day, who's still running around the floor waving the ticket and is saying, okay, I have a buy. It's going to be, 50 million from this big buyer, and I need to do that right now. Is there still a place for that kind of auction house, big money vibe, people screaming, yelling, like a salon to show the movements of institutions? Is that even a thing? The Sotheby's, everyone gathers to bid on the whatever. Like,
yes.
There's a market, there's an opportunity for that, but is that going to migrate to the collectibles, the 100%, sort of the NFT, the unique area? Is that where people want that concierge service? Or do you really think there's still going to be a need for the guy with a lanyard and his little tag with a security badge to be the one who puts in your order for pork bellies, Microsoft, and spot ETH ETF?
I think change happens slowly and then all at once, and I think we will see that change. It already is starting to happen. Like the last time I was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, it's not as crowded as it once was. A lot of what they show on TV is a set. It's almost more of a television set than anything. So I do still think there would be an opportunity for that, but I more so on the 24/7 opening of new opportunities. To me, that's where you're starting to get to retail investors and people who are realizing that the way to build wealth is to have ownership, and the way to have ownership, at least in a fractionalized sense in the United States, is through the owning of securities and the investing in valuable companies who are creating value for their customers. So yeah, I think there will always be, maybe some version of what that in real life marketplace looks like. Marketplaces change. They look different over the decades, over the centuries. We've gone from actual markets with bread and things to OpenSea, to now Coinbase and Binance and these more sophisticated digital markets. But I think there will always be an in-person. You mentioned Microsoft, and so I'm then looking through the headlines. This is interesting. From 12 hours ago, Microsoft announces 1.7 billion investment to advance Indonesia's cloud and AI ambitions. Why now? Why today? Why April 30th? Are they coming out announcing from Jakarta 1.7 billion over the next 4 years in Indonesia? What does that have to do with Microsoft, and why AI in what otherwise would be a non-involved country? Wonder why.
Yeah, my just like back of the napkin read on that is, well, look, what are some things we know about Indonesia? We know that Indonesia is a country that comes up often in the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. We kind of made the joke in previous recordings about the technological hitman, the idea of coming into a place with a large amount of money to invest, quote, into infrastructure. In the old days, it was the power grid and petroleum refinement and roads. In the new days, it's, hey, look, India is pretty saturated, right? We can probably admit that. India now has more people in it than China. India is now working with more American companies than China, especially in software and high tech. China still owns the manufacturing, of course, or has a stronghold on that for actually making chips and hardware. And Indonesia happens to have a lot of people and an entire environment where you can see, I don't want to use the word exploitation lightly because I know Microsoft is not trying to explicitly exploit, but $1.7 billion in a country like Indonesia in terms of building stuff, hiring people, creating new AI tech, et cetera. It goes a lot further than trying to put that $1.7 billion into a country, say like Sweden, or something else, which is much tinier and more insular. So yeah, it seems to me like Microsoft, you got to follow the money, right? What is Microsoft also invested in? Microsoft is heavily invested in Clear. It's heavily invested in recording eyeballs. It's heavily invested in trying to steal, your screen time game minutes with its Xbox products. It's also heavily invested in funding the largest kind of open wallet for transactions of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, of NFTs, right? You want to move an NFT around, likely you're using MetaMask. And that's fully in bed 100% with the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah.
So if you ask me what the $1.7 billion is, I think it's to protect Ethereum and try to build more AI. And they're going to do that in Indonesia.
It's according to research by Kearney, AI could contribute nearly $1 trillion to Southeast Asia's gross domestic product by 2030, which I love that they're giving the 6-year projection, as you know, economic tech men like to do. By investing this $1 billion, we're going to increase the GDP by up to $1 trillion, focusing on skills to unlock an AI-powered economy. I also think that as you talk about like decentralized payment systems, you mentioned MetaMask, and you're thinking about a country like Indonesia. I don't know what the existing banking infrastructure in Indonesia looks like, but if you're Microsoft and you can start to deploy things like a MetaMask into developers' hands, think about the payroll, the way they can control the flow of that money to whom and for what gets created for that money, I think is very, very interesting. Any other headlines? I know we saw the six Bs. Speaking of big billions, we got 6 Bs coming from Elon Musk. This feels like a debt shifting around to fund his XAI. I don't know what your take is on the other $1 billion move from our boy Elon.
Yeah, the billions. Just one note on Indonesia. It's worth looking at if you just look up the World Bank. The World Bank is, as we know, an apparatus of the U.S. that gives aggressive loans to developing countries. It looks like there have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 approved projects for Indonesia in the last year. 5 in the last year. It started in June of last year, and then again in September, then again in December, then again in December, and then again this January, totaling looks like $70 billion over 400 projects.
70
billions. 70. So when you're talking about Microsoft lobbing in a $1.7 billion and then saying it's going to go 1, 2, 3 orders of magnitude in 6 years to get you to $1 trillion, you want to talk about some economic hitman nonsense. That is so talking out of both sides of your mouth, and not even mentioning the fact that they're talking about that because it's not just their investment of the 1.7. It turns out there's 70 more billion coming. Now, of course, it has titles which don't say AI, right? Sustainable electrification program, strengthening
always about that electrical
transfers. Indonesia health system strengthening project, labor market information and skill system transformation. That's probably the one that looks like it's got the most teeth, but that's only 144 million towards AI. So you got to remember these types of loans or investments don't come in isolation, right? Microsoft wants a headline, so they make the headline. The World Bank, they don't want headlines. They want Microsoft to have the headline. So bringing it back to Musk, Musk likes a headline. The World Bank and the IMF does not like a headline. Musk looks like he has finally decided he's going to really, it's just, to me, it feels like one step, like I imagine Musk in the center as the hub, right? In a visual graphic. And there are these spokes that come out, and the spokes go touch these different projects and these different companies. And sometimes there's dash lines, right? Because there used to be a solid line that went out, for Tesla. There's a solid line out for solar or whatever it's called. There's a solid line out for Neuralink, solid line out for this. There's a dash line out to OpenAI. Let's not forget he was the original, with Sam trying to create OpenAI. There's a few least tethers of influence. And I feel like this move with him talking about all his stuff with X platform, maybe you can kind of give me your read on it, is pulling those nodes closer to the center until it kind of all just becomes one little tight circle. Is it Musk
one
trying
ring to rule them all?
Apple? One ring. I was where I was going. You got it. One ring to rule them all. Like Apple very famously created its own closed, private, call it whatever you want, network, your own walled garden, there's all these terms for that. And Apple has done it very successfully, right? Hardware to software in the handoff, and no one else can monkey with it.
It's called
Facebook
one
is trying
infinite
to
loop.
One infinite loop. So I feel like Musk is trying to harden and increase the height of the walls, dig the moat deeper on the outside so that the castle kind of operates as its own virtuous loop and circle. And to the point where he's even advertising and moving money around them to each other. Yeah. The value is hard to define if it's always sharing some of its own value, which is an odd little virtuous cycle, which I think it succeeds in artificially bolstering things like Tesla's falling stock price.
I think that that's a really good hot take on what Elon has been doing for, going on 2-3 decades now. Everything was always about the product and the sale and the market saturation leading to the next thing. And I give very tangible examples of this, but he talked about the Roadster being sold at that premium price. And the Roadster was to create the midsize car, and the midsize car was to build the affordable car. And then the revenue from Tesla was to build SpaceX. And then the SpaceX was to fund the Boring Company. And then the Boring Company, and like when you just talked about how these were tentacles, but yet somehow daisy chained and these dotted lines now starting to orbit closer together. I'll give you a really tangible example. Just in the past couple of days, I found myself standing up some marketing campaigns on Twitter. I had not done any paid advertising on Twitter in a while. And the way I was able to achieve target audiences was using Grok, using the AI literally built into Twitter to chat with it about what people are tweeting about in real time and create target audiences. So all of a sudden, when you talk about things all coming together, I then see that AI, when all of a sudden I can talk to and chat with all of my products in all of my battery operated electrical grid, right? I have my Tesla solar panels. I have my Tesla out front. Maybe I'm catching an auto taxi. I'm tweeting about things on Twitter. I want to watch content. He's leaning heavy into cast your Twitter video to your television. We talked about this, I think, on the last show, like leaning into TV. The AI then becomes, to your point, that center magnet where you can coordinate amongst all of these different businesses in the most efficient way possible, even if that means moving capital around to bolster each of those businesses in the most efficient way possible. And I would not doubt that that is exactly what is happening to move all that money into the AI project. And one of the things that we know Elon did with that, and we got to keep an eye on this one, but was that special SEC filing, that special S1 filing, where he got a pass on this being decentralized enough, right? Like I need to go back and look at it, but it was like I don't remember what the ruling on it was, but that to me is where you're going to see if you all of a sudden the magnet snaps and all that IP is locked up inside of that new entity. It would make sense that he's already set himself up from a legal structure perspective to be able to fractionalize the ownership of that IP, something that he has said from the ground up, like, Tesla Supercharger network. The IP is open because he knew he needed to saturate the market with that in order to win the long game. I would have no doubt that the same logic being applied to AI. So that's my final take, but yeah, give it to me.
No, I love it. No, I'm just sort of now my wheels are turning, and it's like I think a great place to leave it. But I'm just going to think about this for the next week or so. Does the decentralization of those different assets allow you a better, easier, more legal, more regulatory approved or whatever way of using that network effect to back each one of your entities? Meaning, like if a spot Bitcoin ETF was going to be Bitcoin only and there was all these problems, then they're like, okay, we're going to recant that. We're going to say it's Bitcoin and cash. And if a spot Ether ETF is able to be backed by something that's not just the one thing, but a few other things, like then wouldn't it stand to reason that if you can structure your organization just right, that it's actually perfectly okay to bolster your Neuralink with Tesla stock profits and proceeds, and so similarly bolster Tesla stock with your X advertising, which happens to be advertising for Teslas on X. So you can kind of create this decentralized but necessary loop that just like a board game, you just keep moving the pieces in a clockwise circle, and everyone keeps paying themselves, except that it's not fishy or dirty because each of those companies, while owned and operated by the same human, is really being governed by an AI that's being built to decentralize them enough. It feels like there's a separation of the human and the AI that has to be made with that perfect finite little description so that they can do these special filings and so that they can effectively pass muster with all these regulatory bodies, which are woefully behind and ill-prepared to make decisions because the tech is just too new. That's what I'm wondering about.
I like that you just drew parallels between the conversation we were talking about how the SEC is going to regulate the backing of these financial instruments to an individual private company who has in many ways obfuscated how he is backing and funding these private companies. That I think is a good space to watch, because if we know anything about Elon, he's following what the regulators are doing, and perhaps in this case, just following their lead, and exactly what this new infrastructure looks like when you have an everything bot, when you have an artificial intelligence, when you get to AGI. I love where it is going. We will have to leave it there, sir. We will do it
Great
again
talking to you
next week.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Off the Record on the Rocks. Join us next week for more news on all things Web3. Check, please.